The gas thing, the lead in the gas thing is just crazy. It's just crazy to know that that was all done because someone couldn't patent ethanol. They couldn't patent other formulations that would lead to the same result, but I mean, same result in terms of not having gas making your engine knock, but wouldn't be as profitable for this person.
Yeah, and
so
I
twisted.
think, it may be worth mentioning or describing what a smelter does for people, because I think people are not familiar with that anymore. We don't have them in our cities anymore. But, what these things were these giant primary smelter is to melt rock. It was like taking the rocks from mines that were full of all these different metals, including arsenic. This is where the arsenic came from. But they were full of metals like, lead and copper and silver and gold, and melting those rocks in these giant furnaces. And all of this put off an enormous amount of pollution, particulate pollution that was going up the smokestack. And they were, the companies that ran these things were keeping all the valuable metals that they could for themselves, the silver and the copper and all of that. And so they did have filters on them. But one of the things that happened sometimes with these smelters is that they would kind of fail, or the filters would fail. There's this horrifying example in Idaho. It was a company called Bunker Hill that was one of the largest silver mines, I think, in the world. And they had a lead smelter in this town called Kellogg, which is right on I-90. If you've ever driven on I-90, from Missoula, Montana or something like that to Seattle, you've driven through this place. And they built, this giant smelter facility to handle all the stuff they were pulling out of the mines. And in 1973, they had a fire in their filtration building that destroyed most of the filter. That was the thing that was supposed to keep lead from going up the smokestack. And there were kids in this town. There was an elementary school right across the street from the smokestack.
Jesus.
And the descriptions of that school are so horrifying, because the teachers used to think that sometimes that the facility had caught fire because there was so much smoke.
Oh, God.
But in fact, there wasn't, it was just what the smokestack was putting out. But after that filter failed, that company, which was owned by Gulf and Western at the time, did a kind of back-of-the-napkin calculation of what those kids' lives were worth, because they felt like, okay, we're going to get sued if we keep running the plant without filtration, but is that really going to matter? Because these kids' lives are probably only worth about $11 million a piece.
Oh, my God.
And our profits are such that it makes more sense to keep operating regardless of what happens to these kids.
Oh, my God.
And we know this because of the lawsuits that were ultimately filed, because, they did end up in court. And there were kids, there was a baby who was more lead poisoned than any human being that the doctors had ever seen.
So it says here that after it destroyed the fire broke out that destroyed the filters. It says for the next year and a half, the smelter continued to operate, and dust polluted with heavy metals rained down on the area. During that time, children living in the area were screened for lead by the state and the U.S. Center for Disease Control, and the results were foreboding. Children in Kellogg, for example, averaged 50 micrograms per deciliter of blood. The CDC recommends 5 micrograms, high enough to warrant concern. And children with levels above 45 micrograms are advised to undergo chelation therapy, which involves administering compounds like, I don't know how to say that word, how do you say that word?
I don't know.
Dimercaptosacinic acid, either orally or intravenously to remove heavy metals from the bloodstream. Lead is a neurotoxin linked to schizophrenia, poor academic performance, low cognitive ability, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Once the metal gets into the blood, it concentrates in the brain, the kidneys, the liver, and the bones. In pregnant women, lead can cross into the placenta, poisoning their unborn babies. Holy shit.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nightmarish thing. And
look at this. It says, oh my God. So, listen to this. Slowly poisoned. As a teenager in Kellogg, Ohio, Flory, this person I'm talking about, attended the Silver King School, built in 1928 in the gulch between the Bunker Hill Lead Smelter and Zinc Plant, an offshoot of the Coeur d'Alene River flowed by the school. It was, says Flory, a light glowing green color. Sort of a glow, like a glow stick. Oh, God. In 1973, a fire broke out, and so this is the fire that we were talking about. Oh, my God. A light glowing green color.
yeah.
Fuck.
I used to live in New Jersey, right by the in Jersey City,
Oh, yeah.
right by the Liberty State Park, which a bunch of the acreage of that was off limits to people because it was so polluted.
Yeah.
And I remember, because you could actually walk from my apartment in Jersey City to Liberty State Park, but you had to go by this place that was crushing cars, one of those facilities where they compact cars. And I mean, there was all this heavy industry there and pollutants. And you had to walk across this little wooden trail over a stream to get to the park. And the water was that color. I mean, it was like this disgusting, color not found in nature. And you just looked at it and thought, what is that? What's in that?
And this is in the United States of America, where we have at least some kind of regulations. Just imagine what is happening when these companies are allowed to ship off to third world countries where there's no regulation and they're bribing officials and just
that's
polluting everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happened with the Sarco. Once the EPA had sort of got started and the various Clean Air and Clean Water Acts were passed and legislation about what you could do in the workplace, because, I mean, imagine what it was like to work in these smelters. It was, it just basically became illegal to operate them, and the companies could no longer afford to do it, so they all pretty much went out of business in the 1980s. But it is just an incredible sort of time in America, because it was like, well, what's the trade-off here? The profits are worth much more than people's lives.
God.
And that place, the Coeur d'Alene, there's a city called Coeur d'Alene in Idaho, but there's also this giant lake, Lake Coeur d'Alene. And all that pollution from Bunker Hill, from the mines, from the smelter, it all went down river and is now sitting at the bottom of Lake Coeur d'Alene. And that's been a Superfund project for many, many years, but they really can't clean that up, because it's the kind of thing where you try to remove the sediment that's full of all the lead and stuff, and it stirs everything up. And so it's really, really almost impossible to clean a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, we were talking about this the other day, that you really shouldn't even eat freshwater fish, because freshwater fish, the problem is, because of all the pollutants that settle into these lakes, when you don't have flowing water, freshwater fish is just sitting in all these chemicals and all these heavy metals, and it's really disturbing. Like, if you eat freshwater fish, your exposure to forever chemicals is like ridiculously high. Like, what was the number? We pulled it up the other day, but it's akin to, like, eating one freshwater fish is akin to, I believe it's like a year of exposure to forever chemicals.
Yikes.
Yeah, BPAs and all these different disgusting things that are a part of our world that we didn't know until it was too late. Eating one freshwater fish equals a month of drinking forever chemicals water. Oh my God. PFAS found in high levels in freshwater fish, with most concern for vulnerable communities. I remember we did this television show once, and we were in Detroit, and Detroit, which is notoriously very poor, and at one point in time was the third richest city in the world. But when we were there, these people were fishing in this lake, really obviously very poor people, and just catching food in this lake. And I was like, oh my God, like, what are these people eating? Like, this is clearly polluted water. And it was just outside of a plant. And, you know, they had no choice. They needed food. And so they went there. They're poor, and who knows what kind of health consequences these poor people are suffering from.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely the poor communities that get the worst.
And the thing is, it's like
this.
150 years ago, all that was pristine. It's such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
If you think about how long those lakes existed, how long these river systems existed, and in a couple of 100 years, we've ruined everything essentially forever. For profit.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they knew it, and that's what's sick. The thing you're telling me about this smelting plant and the fire in Idaho, and the fact that they knew, and they made a back of a napkin calculation as to these children's lives, that is so disgusting. It's so hard to believe that that's how people operate, but yet I know they do.
Yeah. I mean, it's murder.
Yeah.
And that's why I called it Murderland. You know, I think that the behavior of these corporate actors was as bad. I mean, it's, you know, maybe pernicious to compare, but I think that, you know, people have come to see that the ways that corporations have behaved is murderous. You know, that they're not, I mean, aside from, you know, just the issue of taking responsibility, they're just going to go ahead with what they want to do and make the profits that they want and leave us to pay the price. And that, I think, is something that in a sane world would have to change. You know, we would have to look at what a corporation wants to do before they start doing it.
Yeah.
You know, and figure out, okay, well, if they want to proceed with this, how do we prevent the damage that could occur? And if they can't figure out how to prevent it, they shouldn't be operating.
Also, they lie.
They lie.
Whatever they're going to tell us. I mean, we've found this out from pharmaceutical drug companies that when they run studies, they'll run 10 studies that show damage, and they'll find one study that they can kind of manipulate into showing some sort of efficacy, and then they'll publish that one study and bury the other studies that show damage, and then release a product, and then have internal emails where they show that they know that this is going to cause problems. And this is the issue with the drug Vioxx that wound up killing somewhere in the neighborhood of 60,000 Americans. And I know people don't like to equate those people with serial killers, but what else would you call that? What else would you call if you know that you're going to kill people, but you're also going to make money, and you decide, let's do it anyway. Let's do it anyway.
Yeah.
Let's make some money. And 60,000 people die because of it. And then who knows how many people also survived but got strokes. And it's a large number.
Yeah, it's now very difficult to figure out how many people were directly and indirectly harmed by these smelters because of the destruction of evidence. Many of them had sort of, you know, people on staff whose job it was to put out false information in Tacoma, there was a guy, a doctor at the smelter, who wrote false papers saying that, the workers aren't being harmed by exposure to arsenic, when in fact his numbers showed that people who worked at the plant were dying of an elevated percentage of lung cancer. And he suppressed that information. He said, their deaths were from heart failure, which everybody dies of heart failure, so he basically was falsifying the information from their death certificates and publishing papers, designed to make it look like arsenic wasn't a poison.
And probably nicely rewarded by the corporation for doing that. There's just this issue of diffusion of responsibility when you have this obligation to your shareholders to continually make each quarter generate more income. And then you have to figure out how to do that. And then you realize, I'm just a part of a big thing. I'm just going to do my job to get more money. I'm not going to think about the consequences. I'm just going to put blinders on and think about my vacation home that I'm going to get out of all this.
Yeah. I mean, it's, what you said about the lying is really true. And this is what you see in serial killers, you know, that they lie about everything. Right. They lie about stuff they don't even need to lie about. It's just, it's their MO. Yeah, they're just so inured to it, and they want to get away with what they're doing.
They should have went for corporate America. Should have worked for them, and they could have got away with it. They might have been fine. Never got caught. Yeah. I mean, I wonder how many people who are working for these chemical corporations and how many exhibit the exact same traits as serial killers. They just don't want to get intimate and actually physically cause the murder, but get some sort of a bizarre thrill out of knowing that they're doing this kind of damage to people for profit.
Yeah, I think that kind of psychopathy is maybe more common than we would like to think.
Yeah, we don't want to think about it. We don't want to think about sociopaths. We don't want to think about psychopaths. And sociopaths and psychopaths, there's a lot of overlap. We don't want to think about what percentage of us exhibit these traits where we have zero empathy.
Right.
And there's a lot of people like that. There's zero. I mean, I know people like that have no empathy. They don't care if other people get hurt. And I don't understand it. But I don't have whatever is wrong with them. And I always wonder, is that nature? Is that nurture? Are we dealing with environmental toxins? There's exposure to something at a young age? What is it that causes that? Is it?
Well, I think it can be brain damage.
Yeah.
I mean, what happens to the frontal cortex of these kids who are exposed to lead and cadmium is that certain parts of the brain fail to develop correctly. And you can see the deficits, the little holes that are supposed to be full of something that helps you make good decisions. The part of your brain that helps you control yourself and control your behavior, that's kind of missing in some of these kids. And they have shown now that the effects are worse in men than they are in women, that the damage to the frontal cortex, the neurology is more marked in men, and they can see this on the MRI scans. And I think there's, I don't know that they know why that's happening, but it does seem to be, a real effect that they're writing papers about.
Well, it does take longer for men to develop their frontal cortex. That's why men are so stupid when they're young, and women are much more mature younger. A 20-year-old woman is probably far more mature than a 25-year-old man, and a lot of that they think has to do with the frontal lobe.
Yeah, I mean, it obviously is some, incredibly important discovery, what they make of that and how it's all going to, come out in the wash in terms of what can be done to help kids who have these issues. That, I think, is another story.
It's just so twisted when you think about the fact that this is all a fairly new thing. Like this chemical exposure. Chemical exposure and pollutant exposure is a fairly new thing in terms of like human history. You know, as we're gaining this understanding of how the human brain develops, which is also a fairly new thing, we're also dealing with this thing that we did collectively as the human race. This thing that we did where we introduced these insane chemicals into the brains of children.
Yeah.
And in this case, like in Idaho, knowingly.
Yeah.
Calculated.
And one of the things that sort of blows my mind is that we've known for centuries, for eons, that these things are bad. You know, I mean, the Romans and the Greeks knew that lead caused, you know, people to go crazy. I mean, they had people who worked with lead, you know, in foundries and things then, and they knew it was a problem. We've known that arsenic is a poison since forever. And yet, you know, comes along the 20th century, and somehow these corporations are telling communities, including the community on Vashon Island, you know, oh, arsenic is really not a problem. You know, the human body just excretes it naturally. You know, all kinds of just crazy arguments were being put forward to justify what they were doing.
I found out at one point in time in my life that I had a disturbing level of arsenic in my system. I went to get blood work done, and my doctor said, you have a concerning level of arsenic. And he started asking me about my diet. And I said I eat a lot of sardines. And he's like, stop doing that. He goes, how much do you eat? I like 3 or 4 cans a night. He's like, don't do that. Wow. So because sardines spend their time in the bottom of the ocean.
Right.
Like, that's where all the heavy metals accumulate.
Yeah.
And I was getting arsenic from eating cans of sardines. I stopped eating the sardines. I waited like a few months. I went back, got more blood work, and it's gone.
Wow.
I was like, wow.
Yeah. I mean, there actually are 2 kinds of arsenic. There's organic arsenic, which you can get from seafood. And if you're eating a lot of, you know, shrimp or sardines or whatever, it can build up. And I think that form of arsenic is less toxic and less of a problem. You don't want it.
You definitely don't want it.
As your doctor
it's not good.
said, don't do that.
It's just crazy.
Yeah, but the stuff that they were producing at the smelter in Tacoma was what's called inorganic arsenic, and that's the stuff they used to poison rats, and they used it for insecticides and very heavily at, you know, during the 40s and 50s they were putting it all over apple orchards and cherry orchards and cotton crops. So those places were then contaminated with arsenic. And Washington State now has 4 plumes of this pollution. The big one was in Puget Sound from the smelter, which was like 1,000 square miles of Puget Sound that was contaminated. But also Wenatchee, which is over in eastern Washington, where they have all these apple orchards. There's another plume there from those pesticides and insecticides.
Ugh.
And there's a couple more. There's another plume up in Everett where there was what they called an arsenic kitchen. The Rockefellers used to own mines up in the Cascade Mountains, and they had a smelter in Everett that was then bought by the Guggenheims, and they moved their arsenic kitchen to Tacoma, but it left all this pollution in Everett. And so they discovered, you know, all these people had built houses and condos and things on top of where the arsenic kitchen had been, which, you know, that stuff was never cleaned up. And so they had to, you know, I think they had to buy those properties